Marcus Chen had built his empire one five-star hotel at a time, transforming Chicago's skyline with gleaming towers that bore his name. At 32, he commanded a hospitality empire worth $300 million, owned penthouses in 3 countries, and wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Tonight, however, he sat alone in his Maserati outside Thompson's auto repair, rain drumming against the windshield like bullets of regret. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who had everything was about to beg a mechanic to fix more than just his broken-down car. His hands trembled as he stared at the modest shop's neon sign flickering through the downpour, knowing that beyond those glass doors worked the only person who had shown him genuine kindness in the past 6 months. Tomorrow's headlines would destroy what remained of his reputation, but tonight, Marcus Chen was just a broken man seeking salvation from someone who understood how to repair things that seemed beyond hope. The morning everything changed started like any other Wednesday in Marcus Chen's perfectly orchestrated life. He woke at 5:30 in his Michigan Avenue penthouse, completed his 40-minute workout routine while CNN played market reports, and reviewed quarterly projections over organic steel-cut oats prepared by his private chef. The Chen Hospitality Group owned 17 luxury properties across the Midwest, and Marcus had built this empire through calculated risks, 16-hour workdays, and an unwavering belief that success meant never showing weakness. His assistant Victoria buzzed through the intercom at precisely 7:15. "Mr. Chen, your father's on line 1. He says it's urgent regarding the Singapore deal." Marcus straightened his Italian silk tie and picked up the receiver, expecting another lecture about expanding too aggressively into Asian markets. Instead, David Chen's voice carried a tremor Marcus had never heard before. "The FBI raided our accounting firm this morning," his father said without preamble. "They're saying someone's been embezzling from our Singapore subsidiary for the past 2 years. $7 million, Marcus. Gone." The coffee cup slipped from Marcus's grip, shattering against his mahogany desk. $7 million represented more than money. It represented trust, reputation, and the foundation of everything he'd built since taking over operations 5 years ago. The investigation moved with terrifying speed. By noon, federal agents had frozen the company's primary accounts. By 2 o'clock, Marcus discovered the signature on the fraudulent transfers belonged to someone he trusted completely, his business partner and former college roommate Jake Morrison. The man who'd stood as best man at Marcus's wedding, who'd comforted him through his divorce, who'd celebrated every milestone of Chen Hospitality's growth, had systematically stolen millions, while Marcus focused on expansion plans. The betrayal cut deeper than any financial loss. Jake had used Marcus's personal access codes, forged his signature on documents, and created a web of shell companies that funneled money to offshore accounts. Worse yet, Jake had disappeared 3 days ago, claiming he needed a vacation to clear his head. Marcus realized with sickening clarity that Jake had been planning his escape while Marcus worried about quarterly projections and customer satisfaction scores. The media descended like vultures by Thursday afternoon. News vans lined Michigan Avenue outside Chen Hospitality headquarters, reporters shouting questions about mismanagement and criminal negligence. Marcus watched from his office windows as his life's work became fodder for evening broadcasts. The stock price plummeted 40% in a single trading session. 3 major investors pulled out, citing concerns about leadership and financial oversight. His father called an emergency board meeting for Friday morning, and Marcus knew what was coming. David Chen had founded the company 40 years ago with a single restaurant in Chinatown, building it through decades of careful planning and conservative growth. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The sensation reminded him of those moments before thunderstorms when the air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first crack of lightning to split the sky. His phone buzzed against his hip, and Sophia's contact photo illuminated the screen her gap-toothed grin captured during last month's school carnival. She had insisted on taking a selfie with him beside the dunking booth, declaring it the best day ever despite the fact that they could only afford 3 game tickets and shared a single funnel cake. "Dad, Mrs. Chen from next door is here, but I wanted to tell you something important before you get too busy." Sophia's voice carried the breathless excitement that meant she had discovered something she considered earth-shattering. Jaros stepped into a supply closet for privacy, surrounded by industrial cleaning products and spare linens. "What's going on, sweetheart?" "I was looking through my art box for colored pencils, and I found that picture I drew last month, the one from my dream about the pretty lady in the white dress." "Dad, she looks exactly like the bride on the news this morning. They showed her getting ready for her wedding at the same place where you work." The cleaning supplies seemed to shift and blur around him as Sophia's words sank in. For months, his daughter had been drawing the same recurring figure, a woman with dark hair and kind eyes wearing flowing white fabric. Jaros had dismissed these sketches as typical childhood imagination, the way kids sometimes dreamed up imaginary friends or fantasy scenarios. "Sophia, lots of brides wear white dresses. It's probably just a coincidence." "No, Dad, it's not just the dress, it's her face, her hair, even the way she holds her hands. I know it sounds crazy, but I think she's important somehow, like she's connected to us." Jaros closed his eyes and tried to steady his breathing. Sophia had always been unusually perceptive, possessing an intuitive understanding of people and situations that sometimes unsettled him. Teachers frequently commented on her emotional intelligence, her ability to sense when classmates needed comfort, or when adults were struggling with problems they thought they were hiding. "Listen, baby, I need you to stay with Mrs. Chen today like we planned. Don't mention the dreams to anyone else, okay? Sometimes our imagination plays tricks on us." After ending the call, Jaros remained in the closet for several additional minutes, trying to process the implications of what Sophia had just shared. The rational part of his mind insisted that 8-year-olds frequently experienced vivid dreams, and that coincidences were far more common than people wanted to believe. But another part of him, the part that had learned to trust his daughter's instincts above his own logical reasoning, wondered if there might be something more substantial behind her certainty. He emerged from his hiding place to find the catering staff beginning their elaborate setup, transforming the club's dining room into something resembling a scene from a luxury magazine. Crystal stemware caught the morning light, casting rainbow patterns across pristine white tablecloths, while servers in crisp uniforms arranged centerpieces with mathematical precision. The wedding coordinator, a sharp-featured woman named Margaret, who treated vendors like barely tolerable necessities, spotted him immediately and beckoned him over with the imperious gesture of someone accustomed to instant obedience. "Jaros, I need you to handle a special request from the bride's family. Amanda wants to do a final walkthrough of the ceremony space, but she's requested privacy. No staff, no family members. Just 15 minutes alone before the chaos begins. Can you make sure the area is completely cleared and secured?" As he nodded his agreement and began the process of diplomatically clearing the garden area, Jaros wondered why a bride would need solitude before the most celebrated day of her life. In his experience, people sought privacy when they needed to confront difficult truths or make peace with complicated decisions. The morning sun climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across the perfectly manicured landscape, and Jaros completed his preparations with the mechanical efficiency of someone whose mind was occupied by questions that had no easy answers. In a few hours, Amanda Blackwood would walk down an aisle, lined with white roses, toward a future that looked perfect from every angle. But Jaros had learned that perfect surfaces often concealed the deepest flaws, and something told him that today's celebration might reveal truths that no amount of money or careful planning could control. The afternoon sun blazed through the stained glass windows of Amanda's bridal suite as she sat motionless before an ornate mirror, her reflection fractured into fragments of colored light. Her wedding dress, a masterpiece of French silk and hand-sewn pearls worth more than most people's homes, hung perfectly on her slender frame, yet she felt as though she were wearing a costume for a role she had never auditioned for. 28 years of careful preparation had led to this moment. 28 years of etiquette lessons, charity galas, strategic friendships, and calculated public appearances that had molded her into the perfect heiress. But beneath the flawless makeup and designer gown, Amanda wrestled with a secret that could destroy everything her family had built, everything she was supposed to represent. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the vintage pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother, the one piece of jewelry she had specifically requested for today. Hidden within its antique clasp was a tiny compartment that contained the only photograph she had kept from her forbidden past, a picture so dangerous that its very existence could unravel the carefully constructed mythology of her privileged life. The image showed a younger version of herself, barely 20, sitting on the front steps of a community college in a neighborhood her current social circle would never visit. She wore thrift store clothing, and an expression of genuine happiness that seemed foreign to her now. Her arm wrapped around a young man whose calloused hands and warm smile told the story of someone who worked with his body, rather than inherited his position in the world. Miguel Santos had been everything her family would have despised. A scholarship student studying automotive engineering while working nights at a garage to support his younger sister, he possessed the kind of authentic integrity that money couldn't purchase, and social status couldn't manufacture. For 6 months, they had existed in a secret bubble of young love, meeting in coffee shops far from her usual haunts, sharing dreams about a future that seemed possible when they were alone together, but impossible when she returned to the Blackwood mansion each evening. The pregnancy had changed everything overnight. Not the pregnancy itself, which had filled her with unexpected joy and terror in equal measure, but her family's response when they discovered her condition. Robert Blackwood had mobilized his considerable resources with military precision, transforming a personal crisis into a strategic operation that would protect the family's reputation, while ensuring that Miguel Santos disappeared from their daughter's life as completely as if he had never existed. Private investigators had compiled detailed reports on Miguel's background, financial situation, immigration status, and family connections. Lawyers had drawn up documents that offered substantial monetary compensation in exchange for his permanent absence from Amanda's life. When he had refused their initial offers, they had escalated to threats that targeted not just him, but his younger sister Maria, whose college scholarship could evaporate overnight if Miguel didn't cooperate with their demands. Amanda had been powerless to intervene, confined to the family estate under the pretense of protecting her health, while her father orchestrated Miguel's systematic erasure from her existence. Phone calls went unanswered, letters disappeared before reaching their destination, and the private security firm employed by the Blackwoods ensured that any attempts at contact were intercepted and neutralized. The baby had been born in a private clinic in Switzerland, far from prying eyes and curious reporters. Sofia Maria Santos, named for both her father and his sister, had possessed Miguel's dark eyes and Amanda's delicate features, a perfect blend of two worlds that were never supposed to intersect. For 3 precious days, Amanda had held her daughter and imagined a different life, one where love mattered more than legacy, and where families were built on affection rather than social advantage. But Robert Blackwood had other plans. The adoption had been arranged months in advance, through a network of discreet agencies that specialized in serving wealthy clients who needed problems solved quietly and permanently. Sofia would be placed with a stable family that could provide for her needs without threatening the Blackwood reputation, and Amanda would return to Chicago to resume her proper role as the dutiful heiress who had simply taken an extended European vacation for her health. What her father hadn't anticipated was Miguel's desperate determination to stay connected to the daughter he would never be allowed to claim. Through a series of legal maneuvers that had exhausted his savings and required him to abandon his engineering studies, he had tracked down the adoption agency and discovered that his daughter had been placed with a family in Chicago. More importantly, he had learned that the adoptive father was a single man named David Martinez, who worked in building maintenance and lived modestly in a neighborhood where Miguel's limited resources might allow him to find employment. The years that followed had been a masterpiece of patient surveillance and careful positioning. Miguel had changed his name to Jaros, moved to Chicago, and systematically worked his way into positions that would allow him to stay connected to Sofia's life without violating the restraining orders and legal agreements that prohibited direct contact. When David Martinez had died suddenly in a construction accident, Jaros had been ready to step forward as an emergency guardian, armed with forged documentation that presented him as a distant relative who could provide stability for the orphaned child. Sofia had been 5 years old when she moved in with a man she believed was her father, too young to remember her earlier life but old enough to sense that something significant had changed in her world. Jaros had been careful to maintain the fiction that he was her biological parent, creating photo albums and family stories that would satisfy any casual investigation, while avoiding details that might lead to uncomfortable questions. For 3 years, they had lived quietly in their small apartment, Jaros working various maintenance jobs, while Sofia attended public school and developed into the perceptive, artistic child who now filled his days with wonder and purpose. He had never tried to contact Amanda directly, understanding that any attempt to bridge the gap between their separated worlds would likely result in losing Sophia forever. But fate had intervened in the form of his employment at Grandview Country Club, where Amanda's family had been members for generations and where her wedding was scheduled to be the social event of the season. For months, Jaros had watched from the margins as wedding preparations unfolded, observing the woman who had given birth to his daughter and wondering if she ever thought about the child she had been forced to surrender. Amanda's fingers closed around the pearl necklace as Margaret's voice echoed through the bridal suite, announcing that the ceremony would begin in 30 minutes. Through the window, she could see guests taking their seats in the garden, their designer outfits and expensive jewelry glinting in the afternoon sunlight. Tyler Richmond, her fiancé, stood near the altar in his custom tuxedo, greeting prominent businessmen and political figures with the confident charm that had made him the perfect choice for her father's dynastic ambitions. Their engagement had been a merger disguised as a romance, two powerful families joining forces to create something larger than either could achieve independently. Tyler was handsome, well-educated, appropriately ambitious, and completely unaware that his bride had once loved someone else deeply enough to risk everything for a future that had been stolen from them both. The knock on her door came precisely on schedule, her father's voice requesting permission to enter for their traditional pre-ceremony moment together. Robert Blackwood stepped into the suite wearing his formal morning coat and an expression of paternal pride that would have seemed genuine to anyone who didn't know him well enough to recognize the calculation behind his emotional displays. "You look absolutely radiant, sweetheart. Your mother would have been so proud to see you today." Amanda accepted his kiss on her cheek while studying his reflection in the mirror, noting the way his eyes scanned her appearance for any detail that might be out of place. He had spent 8 years molding her into the perfect bride for this moment, ensuring that every aspect of her public image aligned with the Blackwood family's strategic interests. "Daddy, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." Robert's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the practiced warmth replaced by the wariness of someone who had spent decades protecting secrets. "Of course, darling. What's troubling you? Do you ever think about her? About Sophia? Do you wonder what kind of person she's becoming, whether she's happy? Whether she ever asks questions about where she came from?" The silence that followed was heavy with implications that neither of them wanted to address directly. Robert moved to stand behind his daughter's chair, his hands resting on her shoulders in a gesture that could have been paternal comfort or subtle restraint. "Amanda, we've discussed this. The choices we made 8 years ago were necessary to protect your future and hers. That child is living a stable, normal life with people who can provide for her needs without the complications that would have accompanied any other arrangement. Today is about moving forward, not revisiting decisions that can't be changed. But what if I'm making another mistake? What if marrying Tyler is just another strategic choice that will leave me feeling empty and disconnected from anything real?" Robert's reflection met her eyes in the mirror, and for a moment, Amanda saw something vulnerable in his expression, a flicker of uncertainty that suggested he might be asking himself similar questions. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by the determined authority that had built the Blackwood Empire. Real happiness is a luxury that people in our position can't always afford. Tyler is a good man who will respect you and support your ambitions. Together, you'll build something meaningful and lasting. That's more than most people achieve in their marriages. The wedding coordinator's voice echoed through the hallway, announcing the final call for all participants to take their positions. Amanda stood slowly, smoothing the silk of her dress and checking her reflection one last time. In 15 minutes, she would walk down an aisle lined with white roses toward a future that looked perfect from every angle but felt as hollow as an empty theater. As her father offered his arm to escort her to the ceremony, Amanda slipped the pearl necklace into her bouquet, hiding the photograph of Miguel and the life they might have shared somewhere close to her heart. She didn't know that 20 yards away, in a supply closet overlooking the garden, Jaros Martinez was adjusting his uniform and preparing to watch the woman he had never stopped loving marry someone else, while their daughter remained unaware that both her parents would be present for the most important moment in either of their lives since the day she was born. The processional music began with the gentle notes of a string quartet positioned beneath the ancient oak trees that bordered Grandview's ceremony space. Jaros pressed himself against the maintenance shed window, his heart hammering against his ribs as 300 of Chicago's most influential citizens rose from their seats in unison. The afternoon light filtered through the canopy of leaves above, creating patterns of gold and shadow that danced across the assembled crowd like nature's own celebration. Tyler Richmond stood at the altar with the confident posture of a man who had never doubted his place in the world. His family had built their fortune in pharmaceutical development, creating life-saving medications that had earned them both immense wealth and genuine respect within the medical community. Unlike many of the guests surrounding him, Tyler had actually earned his position through hard work and innovation, making him the ideal choice for a political marriage that needed to appear authentic to public scrutiny. The bridesmaids glided down the white runner in coordinated elegance, their champagne-colored dresses flowing like liquid silk as they took their positions flanking the altar. Margaret, the wedding coordinator, moved through the proceedings with military precision, her headset crackling with updates from various staff members positioned throughout the venue. Everything was proceeding exactly according to the detailed timeline that had been months in the making. But Jaros barely noticed the pageantry unfolding before him. His entire focus had narrowed to the moment when Amanda would appear at the far end of the garden path, and he would see her face clearly for the first time in 8 years. Would she look happy? Would there be any trace of the woman who had once laughed at his terrible jokes and fallen asleep in his arms while they made plans for a future that seemed possible when they were 20 years old, and believed that love could overcome any obstacle? The music swelled into the traditional wedding march, and the crowd turned expectantly toward the entrance where Robert Blackwood appeared with his daughter on his arm. Amanda moved with the practiced grace of someone who had been trained from childhood to command attention in social situations, her wedding dress trailing behind her like something from a fairy tale. But even from his distant vantage point, Jaros could see the tension in her shoulders, the careful control that suggested she was holding herself together through sheer determination. As they processed down the aisle, Robert nodded acknowledgement to various business associates and family friends, his expression radiating paternal pride and satisfaction. This wedding represented the culmination of decades of strategic planning, the moment when his daughter would finally fulfill her destiny as the bridge between two powerful dynasties. He had sacrificed everything to ensure this day would happen exactly as planned, including his daughter's happiness and his own peace of mind. Halfway down the aisle, Amanda stumbled slightly, her hand tightening on her father's arm as she caught herself. The momentary falter was so brief that most guests probably attributed it to nerves or the complexity of managing a wedding dress on uneven ground. But Jaros recognized the gesture from their college days, the way Amanda's body language changed when she was fighting against her own instincts and forcing herself to do something that felt fundamentally wrong. Tyler stepped forward to receive his bride with a warm smile that seemed genuine enough, though Jaros noticed the way his eyes scanned the crowd of important guests, rather than focusing entirely on the woman he was about to marry. This ceremony was as much about business networking as romantic commitment, an understanding that both bride and groom had accepted as the price of their privileged positions. The officiant, a distinguished minister who specialized in high society weddings, welcomed the assembled guests with words about love, commitment, and the sacred nature of marriage. His voice carried clearly across the garden through the discreet sound system that Jaros had tested earlier that morning, ensuring that every syllable would reach the reporters and photographers positioned at respectful distances around the perimeter of the ceremony space. But as the minister began the traditional wedding liturgy, Jaros found himself thinking about Sophia, who was probably spending her Saturday afternoon with Mrs. Chen, completely unaware that both her birth parents were less than 50 yards apart for the first time since the day she was born. Did she ever wonder about her real family? Did the dreams she described contain fragments of inherited memory, some genetic connection that transcended the careful lies he had constructed to protect her from the truth? The vows began with Tyler speaking first, his words carefully crafted to sound personal while remaining appropriate for public consumption. He spoke about partnership, shared goals, and building a future together that would honor both their families' legacies. Amanda listened with the serene expression she had perfected during years of public appearances, but Jaros could see the slight tremor in her hands as she held her bouquet. When Amanda's turn came to speak, her voice carried clearly across the garden, each word precisely enunciated, despite the emotional undertone that suggested she was struggling to maintain her composure. She spoke about respect, commitment, and the importance of family, carefully avoiding any language that might suggest passionate love or overwhelming happiness. Her vows were appropriate, dignified, and completely hollow to anyone who knew how to listen for what wasn't being said. The ring exchange proceeded smoothly, Tyler's hands steady as he slipped the platinum band onto Amanda's finger, sealing their union with a symbol that had cost more than most people's annual salaries. The gathered crowd murmured appreciation for the ceremony's elegance and the obvious suitability of the match between two such prominent families. But as the minister reached the traditional moment for objections, asking if anyone present knew of any reason why the couple should not be joined in marriage, Jaros felt something shift inside his chest. The question hung in the air for the customary pause, and in that silence, 8 years of careful planning and strategic thinking collapsed under the weight of a truth that could no longer be contained. Amanda's eyes swept across the assembled guests during that moment of silence, and somehow, impossibly, her gaze found his face in the maintenance shed window. For an instant that seemed to stretch across the entire span of their separation, they looked directly at each other across the garden that divided their worlds. Recognition flashed between them like lightning, followed immediately by something that might have been relief or terror or desperate hope. The minister was already moving toward the final pronouncement when Jaros found himself stepping away from the window and walking toward the ceremony space with purposeful strides that surprised him as much as anyone else. His maintenance uniform felt like armor as he crossed the perfectly manicured lawn, his work boots sinking slightly into the soft earth that had been prepared to perfection for this moment. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice cutting through the elegant atmosphere like a blade through silk. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have something important to say." The reaction was immediate and electric. 300 heads turned toward him in unison, their expressions shifting from confusion to outrage to fascination as they tried to process the sight of a working-class man in a maintenance uniform disrupting the most exclusive social event of the season. Margaret, the wedding coordinator, spoke urgently into her headset, summoning security personnel who began moving discreetly toward Jaros's position. Tyler's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger as he stepped protectively in front of Amanda, his voice carrying across the garden with authoritative command. "Sir, this is a private ceremony. I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately." But Jaros kept walking toward the altar, his eyes locked on Amanda's face as she stood frozen between her father and her fiancé, her bouquet trembling in her hands. "My name is Jaros Martinez, and 8 years ago, I was Miguel Santos. I need to tell everyone here about the child that Amanda Blackwood gave birth to and was forced to give away." The silence that followed was so complete that the only sounds were the distant traffic from the street beyond the country club's walls and the gentle rustle of leaves in the afternoon breeze. Robert Blackwood's face had gone completely white, his hand gripping Amanda's arm with enough force to leave marks through the silk of her wedding dress. "Security!" Tyler shouted, his composure finally cracking under the weight of public humiliation. "Get this man out of here immediately!" But Jaros had reached the altar now, close enough to see the tears beginning to form in Amanda's eyes, close enough to speak directly to the woman he had never stopped loving, despite 8 years of forced separation and systematic erasure from her life. "Amanda, I know you think you have to go through with this, but Sophia deserves to know the truth about where she came from. She deserves to know that she has parents who loved each other enough to create something beautiful, even if we weren't allowed to keep it." The name hit Amanda like a physical blow, her bouquet falling from nerveless fingers as she stared at the man who had somehow found a way to stay connected to the daughter she had been forced to surrender. Around them, the assembled guests erupted into whispered conversations and shocked exclamations as they tried to process the implications of what they were witnessing. Robert Blackwood stepped between Jaros and his daughter, his voice shaking with rage and desperation. "This man is clearly disturbed. He's been stalking my family for months, creating elaborate fantasies about relationships that never existed. Amanda, tell them this is nonsense." But Amanda was no longer listening to her father's commands or Tyler's demands for explanations. Her eyes remained fixed on Jaros's face as 8 years of carefully suppressed memories flooded back with overwhelming force. The sound of Sophia's name spoken aloud in this setting had shattered something inside her chest, releasing emotions that no amount of social training or family pressure could contain. "Stop," she whispered, then louder. "Stop. Everyone just stop talking for 1 minute." The authority in her voice surprised everyone, including herself. This was not the dutiful daughter who had agreed to marry for strategic advantage. or the polished heiress who had spent years perfecting her public image. This was the woman who had once been brave enough to love someone completely inappropriate and strong enough to survive losing everything that mattered to her. "His name is Miguel Santos," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the stunned garden. "And 8 years ago, he was the father of my daughter." The aftermath of Amanda's confession rippled through the assembled crowd like stones thrown into still water, each circle of shock expanding outward until every guest sat in stunned silence. Cell phones emerged from designer handbags and tuxedo pockets as the reality of witnessing genuine scandal at Chicago's most exclusive social event began to sink in. This wasn't the polite drama of business rivalries or political maneuvering that typically entertained high society gatherings. This was raw human emotion, threatening to tear apart carefully constructed facades that had taken decades to build. Tyler Richmond stood frozen at the altar, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, humiliation, and growing fury as he processed the implications of what his bride had just revealed to 300 of the most influential people in the Midwest. His pharmaceutical empire depended heavily on maintaining pristine public image and strategic family connections. The merger with the Blackwood fortune was supposed to elevate his company to unprecedented heights of power and respectability. Now he found himself at the center of a soap opera that would dominate society columns and business headlines for months. "Amanda, what are you doing?" He hissed through clenched teeth, his voice low enough to avoid the increasingly sensitive microphones that journalists were discreetly activating around the perimeter of the ceremony space. "Think about what you're saying. Think about what this means for both our families." But Amanda had moved beyond caring about strategic considerations or family reputation. 8 years of suppressed grief and manufactured normalcy had finally found their breaking point, and the relief of speaking Sophia's name aloud in public was intoxicating, despite the chaos it was creating around her. She turned toward her father with eyes that blazed with newfound determination, her voice carrying clearly across the garden despite its softness. "Daddy, I'm done pretending. I'm done living a lie that was supposed to protect everyone except the people who actually mattered. You took my daughter away from me, and you made me believe it was for her own good, but it was really to protect your image and your business interests." Robert Blackwood's composure cracked visibly as his daughter's words stripped away the careful justifications he had used to rationalize his actions 8 years earlier. The assembled guests represented billions of dollars in business relationships and political connections that could evaporate overnight if the Blackwood family became associated with scandal rather than stability. Everything he had built since inheriting his father's modest software company depended on maintaining the respect and confidence of people who were now witnessing his most carefully guarded secrets being exposed in the most public way imaginable. "Amanda, please, let's discuss this privately. There are things you don't understand about the situation, complications that made difficult choices necessary. This man abandoned you when you needed him most. I was protecting you and your future." Giro stepped forward, his work-roughened hands clenched at his sides as 8 years of forced silence finally found their voice. "I never abandoned anyone, Mr. Blackwood. Your lawyers and private investigators made it impossible for me to maintain contact with Amanda or learn anything about my daughter's welfare. You threatened my family, destroyed my career prospects, and used your wealth and connections to erase me from their lives as completely as if I had never existed." The crowd murmured with increasing volume, as the implications of corporate power being used to destroy working-class families became clear to people who had previously viewed such tactics as abstract business strategies rather than human tragedies. Several prominent businessmen who had served on charity boards with Robert began exchanging meaningful glances, calculating whether continued association with the Blackwood name would help or harm their own reputations. Margaret, the wedding coordinator, spoke urgently into her headset, coordinating with security personnel and catering staff to manage an event that had transformed from elegant celebration into public relations nightmare. The photographers hired to capture romantic moments for society magazines were now documenting what appeared to be the collapse of one of Chicago's most powerful families, their cameras clicking rapidly as they preserved every expression of shock and betrayal for posterity. Amanda pulled the pearl necklace from her bouquet with trembling fingers, opening the hidden compartment that contained the photograph she had carried in secret for 8 years. The image of herself and Miguel during their college romance seemed impossibly young and innocent compared to the sophisticated corporate executive she had become. But the genuine happiness captured in that moment was undeniable. "This is who I really was," she announced, holding the photograph high enough for the crowd to see. "This is the person I was before I let fear and social pressure convince me that love was less important than maintaining appearances." Miguel Santos was never the problem. The problem was a system that values money and status more than human relationships and authentic emotion. Tyler's face had progressed from red to purple as the full scope of his public humiliation became clear. The Richmond family's pharmaceutical fortune was built on conservative values and traditional family structures that appealed to their primarily Midwestern customer base. Being associated with illegitimate children and hidden romances could damage their brand in ways that might take years to repair, assuming recovery was even possible. "I will not be made a fool of in front of the entire Chicago business community," he declared, his voice rising to a level that carried clearly across the garden. "Amanda, if you walk away from this altar, you're walking away from everything our families have built together. There will be no second chances, no opportunity to reconsider when you realize what you're throwing away." The threat hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle, its implications clear to everyone present. Tyler wasn't just ending their personal relationship, he was declaring economic war on the Blackwood Empire. The pharmaceutical industry was notoriously interconnected, and the Richmond family's influence could make life very difficult for any company that crossed them. But Amanda was no longer the frightened 20-year-old who had allowed others to make life-altering decisions on her behalf. 8 years of running a billion-dollar technology corporation had taught her that real power came from owning your choices rather than hiding from their consequences. She began removing Tyler's engagement ring with deliberate movements that transformed the gesture into something resembling ceremony. "Tyler, I'm sorry for the embarrassment this has caused you, but I can't marry someone while lying about the most important thing that's ever happened to me. You deserve a wife who can love you completely, and I deserve the chance to be honest about who I really am." The ring hit the white runner with a soft ping that seemed to echo across the silent garden. Around them, 300 of Chicago's elite sat transfixed by the spectacle of genuine emotion, disrupting their carefully ordered world. Some looked scandalized, others appeared fascinated, and a few seemed almost envious of Amanda's courage to choose authenticity over advantage. Juras approached slowly, his eyes never leaving Amanda's face as he extended his hand toward the woman he had never stopped loving, despite 8 years of separation and systematic obstacles. "Amanda, I know this changes everything for you. I know what you're giving up, but Sophia deserves to know that her parents found their way back to each other, even if it took longer than we planned." The sound of their daughter's name spoken aloud by both parents for the first time created a moment of profound silence that seemed to stretch across the entire ceremony space. In that pause, 8 years of grief, loss, and careful reconstruction collapsed into something that might have been hope or terror, or the beginning of healing. Amanda reached out to take Jaros's offered hand, her fingers intertwining with his calloused palm, as naturally as if no time had passed between them at all. The gesture was simple, almost casual, but its implications reverberated through the crowd like an earthquake that would reshape the social landscape of Chicago's elite forever. 3 months later, Sofia Martinez sat at the kitchen table in their new apartment, her art supplies spread across the surface as she worked on a drawing that finally matched the reality around her. The cramped 2-bedroom space had been replaced by a modest house with a backyard where she could play, funded by Amanda's decision to establish a trust that would ensure Sophia's education and security without the complications of Blackwood family control. The transition hadn't been seamless. Sophia had struggled initially with the revelation that the man she had called father for 3 years was actually her adoptive guardian, and that her real parents were the figures from her mysterious dreams. But children possess remarkable adaptability when surrounded by authentic love, and she had gradually accepted the truth with the resilience that had always characterized her approach to life's unexpected changes. Amanda had surprised everyone, including herself, by walking away from the Blackwood Empire entirely, rather than attempting to reform it from within. The technology company her grandfather had built and her father had expanded now operated under new leadership, while she focused on smaller projects that aligned with her rediscovered values. The financial independence she had gained, through years of strategic planning, meant she could afford to prioritize relationships over profit margins for the first time in her adult life. Jaros continued working in building maintenance, though now at a community center in their neighborhood, rather than an exclusive country club. The work provided steady income and benefits while allowing him the flexibility to attend Sophia's school events and help with homework in the evenings. Amanda had offered to support him financially, but he had insisted on maintaining his own contributions to their unconventional family structure. The scandal had indeed dominated Chicago society columns for months, but the public response had been more complex than anyone anticipated. While some prominent families had distanced themselves from the Blackwoods, others had privately expressed admiration for Amanda's courage to choose authenticity over advantage. Several young women from similar backgrounds had reached out to share their own stories of family pressure and strategic marriages, creating an unexpected network of support among people who had previously felt isolated by their privileged circumstances. Robert Blackwood had initially threatened legal action to prevent Amanda from establishing any relationship with Sophia, but his efforts had collapsed when several prominent board members expressed concerns about the company's image being further damaged by attacking a single father and innocent child. The technology empire continued to operate,